Cynthia Caldwell had a presence that seemed to stretch far beyond her modest two-story house on Willow Creek Lake. She wasn't just the HOA president, at least, not in her own eyes. She was the guardian of order, the self-declared protector of property values, and the woman who, in her mind, had single-handedly turned the neighborhood into the most desirable community within 3 counties. Every morning, she strutted down the cul-de-sac with her clipboard tucked under her arm like a general preparing for battle. She inspected lawns, measured grass height with a practiced glance, and even snapped photos of any garbage bins left out after pickup day. The neighbors called her Madam Clipboard behind her back, but nobody dared to say it to her face. Cynthia had built her power on intimidation, one late HOA fee notice at a time. She loved her role. The rules weren't just guidelines to her, they were sacred commandments. No boats left uncovered on driveways, no fences over 6 feet, and no unsightly holiday decorations that clashed with her idea of class. She enforced these regulations ruthlessly, convinced that the neighborhood's prestige was a direct reflection of her leadership. But beneath her polished smile and sharp suits, Cynthia carried a deep insecurity. She wanted more than just compliance, she wanted admiration. To her, authority wasn't enough, she needed people to look at her the way they looked at those who had real wealth. When neighbors gathered at barbecues or lakeside parties, she craved to be the center of attention, not the person others quietly resented. It was at one of these summer gatherings by the lake that Cynthia first felt the sting of envy that would later undo her. Darnell, a quiet man who had moved into the neighborhood 2 years earlier, had docked his brand-new, gleaming luxury boat along the pier. Its polished hull shimmered under the sun, and its chrome details caught every wandering eye. Neighbors admired it openly, circling the dock like bees around honey. Darnell didn't brag, he didn't need to. His easy smile and casual confidence said everything. Cynthia tried to act indifferent, sipping her wine while standing among her usual circle of supporters. But she noticed the shift, people weren't hanging on her words. They were glancing at the boat, asking Darnell about features, and whispering about how lucky he was. The sight gnawed at her. He doesn't even contribute to the HOA board, she thought bitterly. What has he done for this community that makes him worthy of such admiration? Her friends made it worse without meaning to. One of them, clearly trying to flatter Cynthia, remarked, "Imagine if the HOA president had a boat like that, now that would be fitting." The others laughed lightly, but Cynthia felt her cheeks flush. That night, as she walked home, Cynthia's thoughts churned. The boat became a symbol of everything she lacked, not wealth necessarily, but respect. She imagined herself hosting her board members on a sunset cruise, champagne glasses in hand, neighbors nodding at her power and taste. The fantasy grew stronger every time she passed by the dock and saw Darnell's boat glistening against the water. Soon, it wasn't just envy, it was entitlement. In her mind, the boat wasn't just Darnell's property. It was part of the neighborhood, part of the image she had worked so hard to create. And as the self-declared guardian of that image, why shouldn't she enjoy it too? Why shouldn't she, the president, take the lead in showcasing it? Cynthia's confidence in her own authority blurred the lines between right and wrong. She had enforced dozens of fines, issued warnings, and lectured countless homeowners on the importance of respecting community property values. Now, standing at her window and staring out at the distant sparkle of the lake, she convinced herself of one dangerous idea. If anyone had earned the right to enjoy that boat, it was her. And with that seed planted, her downfall had already begun. The seed of Cynthia's envy sprouted quickly, growing into a full-blown obsession. Every morning when she made her inspection rounds, her eyes drifted toward the lake. There it was, Darnell's boat, sleek and untouchable, bobbing gently in the water like it was mocking her. Its glossy paint gleamed in the sun, and she swore it looked more majestic each day. At first, she told herself it was simple curiosity. She lingered near the pier longer than necessary, pretending to check on the condition of community property while sneaking glances at the boat. Sometimes she even made notes on her clipboard, though there was nothing to write. Other times, she leaned against the railing, imagining herself at the helm, steering with confidence as her neighbors cheered. By the end of the week, the fantasy had sharpened into desire. One afternoon, Cynthia overheard two women chatting as they walked past her manicured lawn. "Did you see Darnell's boat again yesterday?" one said. "He took his family out. Looked like something straight out of a magazine cover." "I know," the other replied. "He's so lucky. Not many people around here can afford something like that." They didn't notice Cynthia stiffening on her porch, gripping her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles turned white. Lucky? She thought bitterly. What about all my hard work keeping this place in order? Don't I deserve something, too? That night at dinner, Cynthia's husband, Greg, noticed her silence. "You're unusually quiet," he said between bites of roast chicken. "Board meeting go badly?" Cynthia shook her head. "No, it went as expected. It's just, have you noticed how people look at that boat? Like it's some kind of crown jewel of the neighborhood." Greg shrugged. "It's a nice boat, CYN. People like shiny things. Doesn't mean anything." But to Cynthia, it meant everything. She waved her fork sharply. "I built this community. I set the standards. And yet, everyone fawns over a toy, as if that defines success. They should be respecting me, not gawking at him." Greg chuckled lightly, not catching the storm brewing in her voice. "Well, unless you want to spend a fortune, I don't see how you're getting one of those anytime soon." Cynthia didn't laugh. Instead, she thought, who says I have to buy one? The idea started as a whisper but grew louder each day. She began timing her lake walks around Darnell's schedule. She noticed that on weekdays, the boat sat untouched, waiting. The keys, she discovered one morning, were often left hanging inside a small lockbox attached to the dock. She stared at it longer than she should have, her heart thudding. What harm would it do? A short ride, just to feel the wind in her hair, the spray of water on her face. Nobody had to know. In her mind, she framed it as community spirit. After all, wasn't she entitled to demonstrate the lake's beauty to others? Didn't her title as HOA president grant her privileges ordinary homeowners didn't have? Her chance came sooner than she expected. The following Saturday, Cynthia invited her close circle of friends for wine and appetizers at her house. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, conversation drifted toward the lake. One of them, already tipsy, sighed and said, "Wouldn't it be perfect if we could take a sunset cruise right now? Too bad only Darnell has a boat." Cynthia felt the air shift. All eyes turned to her, the woman who prided herself on solving problems, on always being in control. A reckless spark ignited inside her. "Well," she said smoothly, forcing a smile, "who says it has to be too bad?" Her friends laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Cynthia's mind was already racing. She imagined leading them down to the dock, unlocking the box, and stepping aboard like it had always been hers. She pictured the awe on their faces as she steered across the water, champagne flutes clinking. For once, she wouldn't just be the clipboard enforcer, she'd be the queen of the lake. That night, long after her guests had gone home, Cynthia stood by her upstairs window staring at the moonlit water. The boat swayed lazily, as if waiting for her. Her lips curled into the faintest smile. "Why shouldn't I?" she thought. "I deserve this more than anyone." And with that, temptation was no longer just an idea. It was a plan. The next Saturday dawned clear and golden, the kind of morning that begged people to head for the water. Cynthia had been awake since before sunrise, pacing her kitchen like a commander preparing for battle. Today wasn't going to be just another day of inspections and petty HOA business. Today, she would finally step into the spotlight she believed was rightfully hers. She dressed carefully, not in her stiff HOA meeting suits, but in something more glamorous. A flowing navy blue sundress, oversized sunglasses, and a wide-brimmed hat that made her look like a woman of leisure instead of the neighborhood enforcer. She dabbed on perfume, even though the lake breeze would probably wash it away. To Cynthia, appearances were everything. Her phone buzzed with a message from her closest friend, Marjorie. "We're all set for today? Should I bring champagne?" Cynthia typed back, "Yes." Bring the good kind. This will be a day to remember. By late afternoon, 6 of her friends gathered at her house, buzzing with curiosity. She hadn't told them the full plan, only hinted at a special treat. She let their questions hang in the air, savoring the suspense. Then, with the dramatic flair of someone revealing a grand surprise, she announced, "Ladies, we're going for a sunset cruise." There were gasps, laughter, and wide-eyed stares. "Cynthia! You didn't!" Marjorie exclaimed, clutching her wine glass. "Oh, I did," Cynthia replied with a smug smile. "This neighborhood deserves a leader who knows how to celebrate life's finer things. And today, that's exactly what we're going to do." Her friends followed her down to the dock, some skeptical, others thrilled. When they reached the pier, Darnell's boat shimmered under the late-day sun. Cynthia felt her pulse quicken as she approached the small lockbox. With a quick glance over her shoulder to ensure no one else was watching, she pulled out the key she'd quietly borrowed earlier in the week. The lock clicked open. Her friends gasped. "Cynthia, is this legal?" one whispered nervously. She straightened her shoulders, sliding the key into the ignition with practiced confidence. "I'm the HOA president. If anyone has the right to take this beauty out for a spin, it's me." The engine roared to life, deep and powerful. A thrill shot through Cynthia's chest. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the nagging rule enforcer, she felt like a queen. Her friends clapped and cheered as the boat pulled away from the dock, the water rippling in their wake. The ride was everything she'd dreamed of. The wind whipped through her hair, the lake glittered like a field of diamonds, and her friends toasted with champagne, shouting her praises. She stood at the helm, soaking in every word. "This is incredible, Cynthia. You look like you were born to drive this thing. Forget HOA president, you're practically royalty out here." Each compliment fed her hunger for validation. She laughed louder, steered bolder, and struck poses for photos as her friends snapped pictures for social media. With every passing minute, she convinced herself more and more that she belonged on that boat. As the sun dipped lower, casting the water in shades of orange and pink, Cynthia raised her glass. "To leadership," she declared proudly, "and to the rewards it brings." The women cheered, their voices carrying across the open lake. Cynthia's heart swelled. This was her moment. Finally, the respect she had always demanded was freely given. But just as the last rays of sun slipped behind the horizon, a distant sound broke her trance. A low, steady hum of an approaching engine. Lights flickered across the water, bright, unmistakable, and heading directly toward them. One of her friends leaned over the rail. Cynthia, is that the Coast Guard?" Cynthia's grip on the wheel tightened. Her confidence flickered for the first time all evening. The fantasy was about to collide with reality, and she knew it. Still, she forced a smile, her voice just a little too high-pitched as she said, "Don't be ridiculous. Everything is perfectly fine." But deep inside, a knot of dread began to form. The queen of the HOA had finally stepped onto her throne, only to see the first cracks forming beneath it. The steady thrum of the approaching engine grew louder, echoing across the open lake like a drumbeat of doom. Cynthia's heart hammered in her chest, though she tried desperately to mask her unease with the same poise she wore at HOA meetings. Her friends, however, weren't fooled. "Cynthia, they're definitely coming this way," Marjorie said, clutching her champagne flute. Another chimed in nervously, "Why would the Coast Guard be out here now? Do they check boats?" Cynthia forced a laugh, though it came out brittle. "Of course they do. Routine patrols, that's all. Nothing to worry about." But as the lights grew brighter, bouncing off the water in sharp white beams, her grip on the wheel tightened. The roar of the Coast Guard vessel was unmistakable now, powerful and unyielding. The sleek patrol boat cut through the waves with precision, and within moments, it was pulling up alongside Darnell's craft. "Good evening," one of the officers called out, his voice carrying over the engine noise. "Coast Guard. We're conducting routine checks tonight. Please cut the engine." The words hit Cynthia like a bucket of ice water. Her friends exchanged uneasy glances, the champagne-fueled laughter of minutes ago dissolving into nervous silence. She hesitated. If she cut the engine, she'd lose the illusion of control. But refusing wasn't an option. With stiff fingers, she twisted the key, and the boat fell silent, bobbing gently against the waves. The officers stepped closer, their uniforms crisp, their flashlights sweeping across the deck. "Ma'am," the lead officer said, "can we see the vessel's registration and proof of ownership?" Cynthia's throat went dry. For years, she had demanded her neighbors comply with every regulation, no matter how trivial. Now, faced with the simplest question of all, she had nothing. "Oh, certainly," she stammered, attempting her trademark authoritative tone. I just don't have the papers on me at the moment. This is my boat, of course, but the documentation is at home." The officer raised an eyebrow. "At home?" "Most owners keep registration on board, ma'am." "What's the name of this vessel?" Cynthia froze. She hadn't even noticed the name etched elegantly along the side of the hull. Her friends looked at her expectantly, waiting for an answer. "It's, she fumbled, her mind racing. "The Willow Spirit." The officer's expression didn't change. He flicked his flashlight toward the nameplate on the stern, and Cynthia's stomach dropped. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "this vessel is registered as the Midnight Star, under the name of Mr. Darnell Pierce." "Is that you?" A heavy silence fell across the deck. Cynthia's friends turned toward her, their champagne glasses trembling slightly in their hands. Marjorie whispered, "Cynthia." Cynthia's cheeks burned. She opened her mouth, desperate to salvage her pride, but the words tangled. "Mr. Pierce is a close friend of mine. He allows me to use his boat when I wish." "Is that so?" the officer replied, unconvinced. "We'll need to confirm that with him directly." One of her friends muttered under her breath, "Oh no," another set her glass down, as if afraid of being complicit. The air of luxury and celebration had curdled into raw humiliation. The Coast Guard officer scribbled notes on his clipboard, his professionalism only amplifying Cynthia's shame. "Until we verify ownership, we'll need you to return to the dock immediately. No further operation of this vessel will be permitted tonight." Her hands trembled as she restarted the engine, guiding the boat back toward shore. The ride, once filled with laughter and admiration, was now a slow crawl of silence. Her friends avoided eye contact, their excitement replaced with unease. Every second dragged like an eternity. Cynthia's mind screamed with panic. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to be admired, envied, praised. Instead, she was being escorted back like a scolded child. As the shoreline came into view, she swallowed hard, her smile a brittle mask. "Ladies," she said weakly, "this is just a misunderstanding. Nothing to worry about." But deep down, she knew the truth. The mask had cracked. The Coast Guard had seen through her. And soon, the entire neighborhood would too. The Queen of Willow Creek had just taken her first step toward disgrace. The boat's engine hummed low as Cynthia guided it back toward the dock, but the sound could not drown out the weighty silence that hung over the deck. Moments ago, she had been a queen, standing tall with a glass of champagne, commanding admiration. Now, she felt like a criminal, her friends sitting stiffly around her, avoiding her eyes as though her shame might be contagious. The Coast Guard vessel shadowed her all the way in, its flashing lights reflecting on the darkening water. It wasn't an arrest, not officially, but to Cynthia, it felt worse. The spectacle of it. The humiliation of being escorted. When they reached the dock, 2 officers stepped off first, tying their patrol boat with brisk efficiency. One motioned to Cynthia. "Ma'am, bring her in nice and slow." Then cut the engine. Her hands, normally so precise when writing up HOA citations, shook as she twisted the key. The engine died, and the sudden quiet was deafening. The officers secured the ropes, then turned back to her. Until we verify ownership with Mr. Pierce, this boat is not to be operated by anyone else. Do you understand? The lead officer said. Cynthia forced her chin up, as though sheer posture might salvage her dignity. I understand perfectly. This is just a small mix-up. I'll have everything clarified by morning. The officer didn't argue, didn't even smirk, just nodded curtly and stepped back. Somehow, his restraint stung more than laughter would have. Her friends disembarked quickly, their heels clicking against the wooden dock. None of them offered to help her off the boat. Marjorie, once her most loyal supporter, whispered, "Cynthia, what was that?" But Cynthia brushed past her, pretending not to hear. By the time she stepped onto the pier, neighbors had begun to gather. The flashing Coast Guard lights had drawn them like moths, and now clusters of curious faces peered from porches and lakeside lawns. "Is that Cynthia?" someone murmured. "Isn't that Darnell's boat?" another whispered. "Oh my God, she got caught." The words sliced into her like daggers. Cynthia straightened her back, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat as though that would shield her from their stares. She tried to walk with dignity, but her steps faltered under the weight of their eyes. Her friends peeled off quickly, muttering excuses. Within minutes, Cynthia was left alone on the dock, her only company the fading glow of the Coast Guard patrol lights disappearing into the distance. The humiliation didn't end there. By morning, whispers had already spread through Willow Creek. The neighborhood group chat buzzed with thinly veiled comments. Did anyone else see the Coast Guard down at the pier last night? Looked like someone got caught joyriding. Funny how the rule enforcer doesn't seem to follow rules herself. Screenshots of the spectacle even surfaced on social media. Someone had snapped a blurry photo of Cynthia on the deck, her oversized hat tilted awkwardly as she spoke with the officers. The caption read, "HOA Queen?" More like boat thief. For a woman who lived off appearances, it was devastating. Cynthia tried to carry on as though nothing had happened, striding through the neighborhood with her clipboard, but the respect she once commanded was gone. People no longer lowered their voices when she walked by, now, they whispered openly. Some even smirked. At the grocery store, an elderly neighbor who once praised her for keeping standards high chuckled as Cynthia passed and said, "Careful, folks, she might steal your shopping cart next." Cynthia's cheeks burned, but she forced herself not to respond. Retaliation would only fan the flames. Still, the humiliation clung to her like smoke, impossible to wash away. She told herself she could still control the narrative. That if she held her head high long enough, the gossip would fade. But deep down, she knew the truth. Her carefully constructed image of authority had cracked wide open, and everyone had seen what lay beneath. And worse still, Darnell hadn't even returned yet. The true reckoning was still to come. By sunrise, Cynthia's humiliation had already grown legs of its own. Willow Creek was a community that thrived on whispers, and the Coast Guard's flashing lights the night before had lit the fuse. It started with the morning dogwalkers. Mrs. Hamilton, clutching her poodle's leash, leaned into her neighbor's ear. "Did you hear?" The Coast Guard escorted Cynthia in. On Darnell's boat, of all things. Within an hour, the story had hit the HOA group chat. The thread exploded with thinly veiled comments. "Anyone know why the Coast Guard was at our dock last night? Maybe Cynthia was out there enforcing lake regulations? Pretty sure that was Darnell's boat." Awkward. Memes followed by lunchtime. Someone posted a photo of a toy yacht captioned, "Cynthia's new ride, papers not included." Another quipped, "Breaking HOA rule number 101, don't steal your neighbor's property." Even those who had once feared her iron grip now joined in. Years of petty fines and warnings, mailbox paint not the right shade, grass too long by half an inch, came back to haunt her. Neighbors relished watching the self-appointed queen stumble. At the cafe near the lake, laughter spilled over the counter as two baristas shared the story with customers. She told the Coast Guard it was her boat. Can you believe that? Cynthia, lying through her teeth. Cynthia tried to carry on as usual. She dressed sharply, donned her wide-brimmed hat, and clutched her clipboard like a shield. But as she walked the streets, she felt the weight of every smirk, every side eye. Conversations hushed when she passed, then reignited in snickers once she was gone. Her closest ally, Marjorie, wouldn't even answer her calls. The other ladies of the lake, who once drank champagne at her patio meetings, suddenly had appointments or family emergencies. Cynthia realized, with a sinking feeling, that her loyal court had abandoned her. Worse still, the gossip had reached the very people she couldn't afford to lose, the men on the HOA board. At a hastily arranged afternoon meeting, Mr. Fletcher, the treasurer, folded his arms and said, "Cynthia, this situation has made us vulnerable. Residents are questioning leadership." "Leadership?" she snapped. "This is nothing but a misunderstanding. I was borrowing Darnell's boat." Without his permission, another board member cut in. His tone was pointed, cold. Cynthia's cheeks flushed. "That's irrelevant. What matters is that the neighborhood maintains respect for its governing body." "And that means?" "It means," Fletcher interrupted, "that we can't afford scandals. Not with you at the center of them." The word scandal rang in her ears. She left the meeting with her head high, but inside she was trembling. For years, she had ruled Willow Creek with an iron fist, her authority unquestioned. Now, cracks were spreading through the very foundation she had built. By nightfall, Cynthia sat alone in her pristine living room, staring at her silent phone. She could still hear the echoes of laughter outside, neighbors gathering on porches, reliving her disgrace. She had built her power on fear and control, but now, stripped of her aura, she was just another story to laugh about. The Queen of Willow Creek was no longer feared, she was ridiculed. And gossip, once unleashed, was impossible to contain. And somewhere, out there, Darnell was on his way home. When he returned, the storm would only intensify. The morning Darnell returned, the air around Willow Creek felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. Neighbors lingered outside, pretending to water their lawns or check their mailboxes, all hoping to witness the fallout. Cynthia had seen his truck pull into the driveway from behind her blinds. Her stomach clenched as he stepped out, broad-shouldered, calm, with that quiet confidence that made people respect him without him ever needing to raise his voice. He looked rested, tanned from his trip, completely unaware of the storm that had brewed in his absence. For a fleeting moment, Cynthia considered hiding inside, waiting until nightfall. But that wasn't her style. She had ruled this neighborhood for too long to cower now. So she straightened her blazer, adjusted her hat, and walked briskly toward the dock where Darnell was unloading his bags. "Darnell," she called, her voice pitched louder than normal, as though volume could make her sound in control. He turned, raising an eyebrow. "Cynthia. To what do I owe the pleasure?" The casual tone cut her deeper than open hostility would have. He didn't look intimidated, or flustered. Just curious. She cleared her throat. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. While you were gone, I may have borrowed your boat. Strictly for appearances, you understand. A short ride, nothing more." Darnell's expression hardened, though his voice stayed steady. "Borrowed?" He set down his duffel bag and crossed his arms. "Without asking me? Without permission?" "It wasn't like that," she insisted, her words tumbling over one another. "I was representing the neighborhood. Entertaining important friends. I thought—" "You thought wrong." His voice cut clean through her excuses. Neighbors gathering nearby leaned in, the tension drawing them like moths to flame. Cynthia felt the weight of every eye on her. Still, she pressed on. "I've kept this community in order for years, Darnell. The least you could do is show some appreciation. I've enforced rules, maintained standards." By bullying people, Darnell interrupted, his tone sharper now. "By handing out fines for mailbox paint and lawn height. And now, after all that, you go and break the biggest rule of all, you took what wasn't yours." Cynthia's lips parted, but no words came. She had never been spoken to this way, not here, not in her own kingdom of manicured lawns and polished reputations. Darnell stepped closer, lowering his voice so it carried just enough for the neighbors to hear. You didn't just break rules, Cynthia. You broke trust. And trust is the one thing you can't steal back once it's gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to pause. Cynthia's face flushed crimson, and for the first time in years, she couldn't summon a single retort. She turned sharply, heels clicking against the wooden planks of the dock, and marched back toward her house. But her retreat didn't feel like a show of power. It felt like surrender. Behind her, neighbors whispered openly, no longer afraid of her clipboard or her fines. And Darnell? He didn't even chase the moment for glory. He simply picked up his bags, unlocked his door, and went inside, dignified, unshaken. Cynthia's rein was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The HOA meeting hall had never been this full. Usually, only a handful of residents bothered to attend, but tonight every chair was taken, and people stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls. The room buzzed with anticipation, the kind of energy that comes before a public reckoning. At the center table sat Cynthia, clipboard in front of her like a shield. She had dressed impeccably in a crisp blazer and her trademark hat, but the dark circles beneath her eyes betrayed the sleepless nights she'd endured since the Coast Guard incident. Her fingers tapped restlessly against the table as the murmurs around her grew louder. Is she really going to pretend nothing happened? Someone whispered. I heard she almost got arrested, another muttered. She stole that boat. Plain and simple. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For years, Cynthia had ruled these meetings like a monarch, her sharp tongue silencing any opposition. But tonight, the balance of power had shifted. Even her allies looked at her with a mixture of pity and calculation. The meeting began with the usual formalities, budget reports, landscaping updates, but no one was listening. Everyone was waiting. Finally, Mr. Fletcher, the treasurer, cleared his throat. There is one final matter on the agenda, he said, his voice carrying across the tense room. It concerns our president, Cynthia. The crowd erupted in murmurs, heads swiveling toward her. Cynthia lifted her chin, forcing a brittle smile. Yes. I am aware there have been rumors. Let me address them directly. What happened on the lake was a misunderstanding, blown out of proportion. I was borrowing Mr. Pierce's boat, as I have every right to do. From the back of the room, a voice cut through like a blade. With his permission? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cynthia faltered. Well, The door creaked open, and in walked Darnell himself. His presence was calm, steady, but it carried the weight of truth. Every eye turned to him. He nodded politely to the room, then spoke. For the record, he said, his deep voice resonating, I did not give Cynthia permission to use my boat. Not then, not ever. The silence that followed was suffocating. Cynthia's carefully woven story unraveled in an instant. Her clipboard felt suddenly heavy, useless. Neighbors began whispering again, but this time the tone was different, sharper, angrier. Years of resentment spilled out all at once. She fined me for planting roses instead of tulips. She made me repaint my door 3 times. And now she steals from her neighbors? The voices rose, overlapping, swelling into a tide of outrage. Cynthia tried to speak, but her words were drowned out. The board members leaned together, whispering urgently, then Fletcher raised his hand for silence. Given the circumstances, he announced, and the damage to the HOA's credibility, we call for a vote of no confidence in Cynthia as president. Hands shot up across the room, first a few, then nearly everyone. The majority was undeniable. Cynthia's power, once absolute, was stripped away in a matter of minutes. She sat frozen, her face pale. For years, she had ruled by fear and control. But fear had given way to mockery, and control had slipped from her grasp. All she had left was the sound of neighbors cheering, not for her, but for her downfall. Slowly, Cynthia gathered her clipboard and stood. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself to walk out with her head held high. Yet the proud posture couldn't disguise the truth: the Queen of Willow Creek had been dethroned. Behind her, the room buzzed with relief and laughter. Darnell, calm as ever, remained seated, respected by all. Cynthia had wanted admiration, but in the end, it was Darnell who earned it, simply by telling the truth. As the door shut behind her, Cynthia realized the bitter truth she could never admit aloud: her kingdom had crumbled, and she was no longer anyone's ruler.